By late 1978, Van Halen proved that they weren't just any old rock band, they were the real deal. Their self-titled debut album, released in February of that year, had redefined what a debut record could achieve. Tracks like Eruption showcased Eddie Van Halen's otherworldly guitar techniques, particularly his revolutionary two-handed tapping. It wasn't just the virtuosity that turned heads, it was the sheer audacity of it. Eddie didn't play guitar so much as he bent it to his will, creating a sound no one had heard before. But Van Halen wasn't a one-man show. David Lee Roth's wild stage presence and quick wit brought a swaggering charisma to the group, while Michael Anthony's thunderous bass and soaring harmonies paired with Alex Van Halen's powerhouse drumming gave their music the muscle to match its flash. The album wasn't just successful, it was a full-on seismic shift in the world of rock. It peaked at number 19 on the Billboard 200 and sold over 1 million copies within months. Critics and fans alike were blown away. Van Halen had a winner on their hands, but because of that, it proved to be a blessing and a curse. The reason? Because the rock world was fickle, and second albums were notoriously make or break. They had to prove their debut wasn't a fluke. After the release of Van Halen, the band embarked on a relentless world tour. Opening for acts like Black Sabbath, Montrose, and Journey, they quickly earned a reputation as show stealers. Black Sabbath's Tony Iommi later admitted that Van Halen's explosive performances had been intimidating, as the young upstarts often left headlining acts scrambling to match their energy. For months, they crisscrossed the globe, playing to sold-out crowds and converting skeptics into believers. Their live shows were electrifying. By the time the tour ended in December 1978, Van Halen was a battle-tested unit. Their confidence was sky high, and they were ready to hit the studio again. Most bands would take some time to decompress after months on the road. Van Halen had no such luxury. Within days of returning to California, they were back at Sunset Sound Recorders to begin work on their second album. Warner Brothers, perhaps underestimating their staying power, gave them a smaller recording budget than they'd had for their debut. If the first album had been a gamble, the second felt like a test. Could they deliver the same magic under tighter constraints? The schedule was brutal. 6 days to record, followed by 2 weeks to mix and master. For most bands, this would have been nearly impossible. But Van Halen thrived on pressure. They didn't just survive the grind, they turned it into fuel. Eddie, ever the perfectionist, brought a clear vision for the album's sound. He had spent the tour refining his tone, experimenting with different setups, and taking mental notes of what worked and what didn't. The Frankenstein guitar, his homemade masterpiece, had become his secret weapon, and he was eager to push it even further in the studio. Meanwhile, Roth approached the sessions with his usual devil-may-care attitude, infusing the proceedings with his infectious energy. Michael Anthony and Alex Van Halen, the unsung heroes of the band, ensured the rhythm section remained rock solid, laying a foundation that allowed Eddie and Roth to shine. Sunset Sound Recorders, nestled in the heart of Los Angeles, was a familiar setting for the band. They had recorded their debut there, and the studio's vintage gear and relaxed atmosphere suited their style perfectly. The centerpiece of the studio was the Putnam 610 console, a piece of recording history that had been used by legends like Frank Sinatra and The Doors. Its analog circuitry offered a warmth and character that modern equipment couldn't replicate, providing the perfect backdrop for Van Halen's intense way of doing things. Ted Templeman, who had produced their debut, returned to helm the project alongside engineer Don Landy. The team's approach remained the same: minimal overdubs, live tracking, and capturing the immediacy of the band's performances. This wasn't about crafting a perfect, polished product. It was about bottling lightning, a snapshot of the band at their most vibrant. The band entered the sessions with a mix of road-tested material and fresh ideas. Many of the songs on Van Halen 2 had been staples of their live set for years, giving them a head start in the recording process. Tracks like Somebody Get Me a Doctor and Beautiful Girls, originally titled Bring on the Girls, were already fan favorites, while new compositions like Dance the Night Away emerged organically during the sessions. Eddie's guitar sound was central to the band's identity, and by the time Van Halen 2 rolled around, he'd fine-tuned his rig to near mythical status. His homemade Frankenstrat guitar was at the heart of it all. Built from a Charvel body and a maple neck he installed himself, it was a Frankenstein's monster of components. The pickup was a Gibson Piaf, patent applied for, humbucker, which Eddie had scavenged from an old ES335. He potted it in paraffin wax to reduce feedback and mounted it directly to the body of the guitar to maximize resonance. The guitar itself was stripped down to essentials: a single volume knob labeled Tone, a joke Eddie loved, and no pickup selector or actual tone controls to clutter the signal. The bridge was a Fender tremolo system that Eddie modified heavily, and he famously used a quarter to stabilize the bridge instead of relying on stock components. Even the paint job, black and white stripes later overlaid with red, was part of Eddie's DIY way of doing things, done in his backyard with masking tape and spray paint bought from a Schwinn bike shop. The Frankenstein guitar was only part of the equation. Eddie's amps were the other half of his signature tone. For Van Halen 2, he primarily used a 100-watt Marshall Super Lead Plexi head from the late 1960s, which he'd modified to achieve higher gain. This wasn't a standard off-the-shelf amp. Eddie pushed it beyond its limits. He used a Variac transformer to lower the voltage going into the amp, which allowed him to crank the volume and gain without blowing the tubes. The result was a warm, saturated distortion that became the cornerstone of his brown sound. To pair with the amp, Eddie used a single 4-12 cabinet loaded with Celestion greenback speakers. These weren't just any speakers. They were known for their rich mid-range response and smooth breakup, complementing Eddie's aggressive playing style. Unlike the wall of amps you'd see on stage, his studio rig was minimal, relying on the quality of the sound rather than the quantity of gear. While many guitarists of the era loaded their signal chains with effects, Eddie kept things simple. His main pedal for Van Halen II was an MXR Phase 90, a phaser pedal that added a subtle swirling texture to his tone. It's most prominent on tracks like Ain't Talkin' 'Bout Love from the debut, but its presence can also be felt subtly in the solos and leads on Van Halen 2. Another staple was the Echoplex EP3, a tape delay unit that Eddie used not for its delay, but for its preamp. The Echoplex added a touch of warmth and compression to his signal, further shaping his sound. It was this combination of precision and chaos, raw volume tempered by carefully chosen tools, that made Eddie's playing so electrifying. Michael Anthony's bass tone on Van Halen 2 played a big part in anchoring the band's frenetic energy. Known for his supportive and unselfish playing style, Anthony focused on locking in with Alex Van Halen's drums, providing a solid rhythmic foundation for Eddie's wild guitar work. For this album, his bass tone was punchier and more aggressive than on the debut. He achieved this by using a smaller Ampeg bass amp instead of the massive rigs typically associated with hard rock bassists of the era. The smaller amp gave Anthony a tighter, more mid-range heavy tone that cut through the mix without overshadowing Eddie's guitar. This was key for songs like Somebody Get Me a Doctor, where the bass needed to drive the track's heavy groove without muddying the frenetic guitar riffs. He likely used his trusty Fender Precision bass, which had become a signature instrument for him. Equipped with flat wound strings, the Precision bass delivered a rounded yet defined tone that sat perfectly in the mix. Beyond his bass lines, Anthony's high-register backing vocals were essential to the Van Halen sound. Songs like Dance the Night Away and Beautiful Girls relied on his harmonies to add depth and melody to David Lee Roth's swaggering lead vocals. Anthony's ability to maintain pitch-perfect harmonies while holding down the low end gave Van Halen an edge over many of their contemporaries, ensuring their music had both muscle and finesse. Alex Van Halen's drumming was equally crucial in defining the band's sound, and Van Halen 2 saw him expanding his approach to rhythm and power. For this album, Alex used his custom Ludwig drum kit, a monster of a setup designed to fill arenas with ease. The kit featured oversized toms, tuned low to create a thunderous, chest-pounding resonance that became a hallmark of Van Halen's live and recorded sound. Alex's snare drum was tuned tight, delivering a sharp crack that added urgency to the faster tracks like Light Up the Sky. The kick drum, often paired with double bass techniques, provided a relentless drive on heavier songs like DOA. His cymbals, supplied by Pasty, were bright and cutting, balancing the low-end rumble of the toms and kick. The Pasty 2002 series, known for their durability and clarity, gave Alex the perfect tools to complement his hard-hitting style. On Light Up the Sky, Alex's drumming shines with syncopated fills and a dynamic use of rudiments, proving he wasn't just a timekeeper but an integral part of the band's complex sound. His use of polyrhythms and creative fills added a layer of sophistication to Van Halen's music, pushing it beyond the straightforward hard rock of the late 70s. Sunset Sound Recorder's setup included a vintage Putnam 610 console, a piece of equipment with a rich history. Originally built in the 1950s, the console had been used by artists like Frank Sinatra, The Doors, and even for Disney film soundtracks. Its analog circuitry provided a warm, organic sound that complemented Van Halen's raw energy. The band recorded to an Ampex MM1200 16-track tape machine, one of the premier tape decks of the era. Known for its reliability and sound quality, The MM1200 allowed the band and their producer, Ted Templeman, to capture every nuance of their performance without losing the immediacy of their live sound. Engineer Don Landy, who had worked closely with the band on their debut, once again used minimal miking techniques to preserve the natural feel of the recordings. For Alex's drums, Landy employed a mix of close miking and room microphones to capture the power and ambiance of his playing. The kick drum was likely mic'd with an Electro Voice RE20, a classic choice for low-frequency instruments, while the toms and snare were captured with Shure SM57s. Overhead microphones, such as Neumann U87s, added clarity and shimmer to the cymbals and overall kit sound. Michael Anthony's bass was DI'd, direct input into the console for a clean signal, but was also mic'd at the amp to retain the gritty character of the smaller cabinet. The combination of direct and mic signals gave his bass lines both punch and warmth. Eddie's guitar, recorded through his Marshall Superlead Plexi and Celestion greenback loaded cabinet, was mic'd with a single Shure SM57 positioned slightly off axis to capture the speaker's natural breakup. For solos, Landy often added a Neumann U67 to capture the room's ambiance, giving Eddie's leads a larger-than-life feel. His acoustic work on Spanish Fly was recorded with a small diaphragm condenser microphone, likely a Neumann KM84, placed close to the sound hole to pick up every detail of his intricate fingerwork. The album opens with a bold choice, a cover of Clint Ballard Jr.'s You're No Good, famously made a hit by Linda Ronstadt in 1975. While it might seem like an unusual opener for a hard rock band, Van Halen made it their own. The track begins with an ominous intro featuring Michael Anthony's flanged bass lines swelling in the mix, paired with Eddie's eerie volume swells, a technique where he muted the initial attack of his chords using the guitar's volume knob, creating a ghostly effect. Roth's vocal delivery oozes menace, turning heartbreak into defiance. Eddie's guitar solo is pure attitude, incorporating hammer-ons, pull-offs, and bluesy bends that build to a searing climax. Despite its slower pace compared to the rest of the album, the track establishes the mood and sets the stage for the fireworks to come. It would have been cool if Van Halen would have incorporated their take on how Linda Ronstadt ended her version. The smoldering grooving part would have been the perfect vehicle for Eddie to really shine over. Still, it's a strong opener to say the least. This was the album's breakout hit and a departure from the heavier material of their debut. Dance the Night Away is a breezy, feel-good track showcasing Van Halen's pop sensibilities without sacrificing their edge. Eddie's riff is deceptively simple, using open strings to create a buoyant, rhythmic backbone, while Michael Anthony's harmonized backing vocals elevate the song to anthem status. Roth's falsetto-infused verses were inspired by his love of soul music, particularly the Ohio Players. The middle section features a cosmic cha-cha vibe with hand percussion and a rhythmic breakdown that adds a unique twist. The track's radio-friendly appeal helped it climb to number 15 on the Billboard Hot 100, marking the band's first major crossover success. By this time, Eddie was obviously becoming much more adept at these controlled harmonics that you could hear definitely in the breakdown. Somebody Get Me a Doctor bursts out of the gate with a snarling riff, driven by Eddie's overdriven Marshall Plexi and Michael Anthony's growling bass tone. A live staple for years before the album, Somebody Get Me a Doctor captures the band's barroom brawler energy. The lyrics, delivered with Roth's characteristic tongue-in-cheek bravado, speak to the exhaustion and excess of a hard partying lifestyle. Eddie's solo is a masterclass in controlled chaos, blending tapping, whammy bar dives, and rapid-fire runs. The rhythm section holds it all together, with Alex's tight, syncopated drumming adding a sense of urgency. It's one of the hardest-hitting tracks on the album and a nod to the band's club days. This one is a favorite among fans for one of their more in-your-face hard-rocking numbers of the day. Bottoms Up shifts gears slightly, bringing a bluesy, laid-back groove to the album. The song opens with a stripped-down intro before exploding into a raucous, rockabilly-influenced riff. Eddie's tone here is less aggressive, but full of warmth, thanks to his amp's natural overdrive. His rhythm work on this is spot on. If there's one thing Eddie had, it was definitely swing. And right there with him, Michael and Alex had a solid swing roof going for Roth to wail over. The track captures the carefree vibe of the band, with Roth laughing mid-song and even singing off-key at one point, a moment the band left in to preserve the authenticity of their performance. The chorus, with its call and response vocals, feels like an invitation to join the party. It's a quintessential Van Halen track, raw, unpolished, and undeniably fun. Closing out the first side, Out of Love Again showcases Alex Van Halen's drumming at its finest. His intricate shuffle rhythm and creative use of rudiments give the track a jazzy, off-kilter feel, while Eddie's riff rides on top with a hypnotic, circular groove. Lyrically, Roth plays the role of the heartbroken rogue, delivering the lines with a mixture of arrogance and vulnerability. The interplay between Alex's drums and Eddie's guitar is particularly striking, highlighting the band's chemistry. It's one of the album's more experimental tracks, proving Van Halen could stretch beyond straightforward rock. And Eddie's solo in this, look out. He starts off with some playful phrasing. This is seriously locked into the groove, and from that point he gets blazing, but he manages to keep everything so clean and articulate yet intense. Another standout EVH solo right here. Side 2 kicks off with a bang. Light Up the Sky is one of the heaviest and most dynamic tracks on the album, packing multiple sections into just over 3 minutes. The song begins with a wicked chromatic run, where Eddie is ascending and Michael is descending notes. Pure oral chaos, then that driving riff, one that would later be revisited somewhat in Hot for Teacher, propelled by Alex's solid drumming, then takes it up a whole step, creating almost a fusion vibe for a second. Roth's vocals take on a more dramatic tone with this one. For that falsetto section, the song takes a completely different turn, much brighter than the rest of it, before Eddie steps in and starts blazing. Eddie's solo is blistering, showcasing his ability to shift between melodic phrasing and frenetic shredding. The song concludes with a brief drum solo from Alex, followed by an outro drenched in backward-massed harmonies. It's a high-energy highlight that remains a fan favorite. Eddie Van Halen's acoustic masterpiece, Spanish Fly, is the album's equivalent of Eruption, but this time, Eddie trades his electric guitar for a nylon string ovation. In just over a minute, he delivers a breathtaking display of finger-tapping, harmonics, and lightning-fast runs, blending classical and flamenco influences with his signature style. The track was recorded with close mic placement to capture every nuance of Eddie's playing, making it feel intimate and immediate. It's a reminder that Eddie's genius wasn't confined to distortion and volume. His creativity extended to every corner of his craft. DOA brings the sleaze and grit, opening with a jagged, dissonant riff that immediately grabs your attention. Roth's lyrics paint a picture of a drifter living on the edge, and his delivery alternates between resigned cool and raw desperation. Eddie's lead work here is particularly fiery, with aggressive bends and staccato runs that feel like they're clawing their way out of the speakers. The rhythm section shines as well, with Michael Anthony's bass adding a sinister undertone and Alex's drums providing a relentless drive. It's one of the darkest tracks on the album and a perfect counterbalance to the lighter moments. Eddie opens Women in Love with a bell-like cascade of tapped harmonics, creating an ethereal intro that's unlike anything else on the album. The song itself is a mid-tempo, groove-heavy track that blends melancholy and swagger. Roth's lyrics are ambiguous, hinting at themes of love, lust, and loss, while his delivery remains playful and charismatic. The harmonized vocals in the chorus add a lush, almost dreamy quality to the track, showcasing Michael Anthony's vocal chops. It's a subtle yet powerful reminder of the band's versatility. The album closes on a high note with Beautiful Girls, a sun-soaked anthem that perfectly encapsulates Van Halen's party-loving vibe. Eddie's riff is simple, but infectious, while Roth's lyrics and ad-libs, "Hey, where you going?" add a layer of humor and charm. The song's chorus, with its layered backing vocals and swinging pocket, is pure fun, and the outro builds to a celebratory crescendo. It's the perfect send-off for an album that feels like an endless summer party. The black and yellow guitar, famously known as the Bumblebee, is an icon on the back cover, but it holds a much deeper story. Dimebag Darrell, the legendary guitar player for Pantera, who tragically died in 2004, was actually buried with it. This was a sign of respect from Eddie Van Halen, as Dime was a huge fan of him. Now, the Bumblebee wasn't actually used during the recording of this album. It had actually been completed in time for the album's photo shoot. The guitar was built by Charvel and delivered by Carl Sandoval in October 1978. But there was more chaos to the actual photo shoot. David Lee Roth wore a cast in the liner notes. He had busted his heel trying to nail that spread eagle jump on the back cover, only landing it on his third attempt. And the liner notes also contain a shout-out to the Sheridan Inn in Madison, Wisconsin, where Van Halen had left their mark, literally. During the first tour, they trashed the 7th floor with fire extinguisher battles and TVs flying out the windows. And then, all in good fun, they went ahead and pinned the blame on their tour mates, Journey. Total classic Van Halen right there. When Van Halen 2 hit shelves on March 23rd, 1979, the anticipation was thick. The debut had set an impossibly high bar, and sophomore albums were often where young bands stumbled. But Van Halen not only avoided the dreaded sophomore slump, they charged forward with swagger and confidence. The album peaked at number 6 on the Billboard 200, a remarkable achievement for a hard rock band in an era dominated by disco and soft rock. Within just a few weeks, it was certified gold, and by May 1979, it had gone platinum. The sales trajectory only grew, with Van Halen 2 eventually reaching quadruple platinum status in the United States. Critics, who were often skeptical of hard rock bands, were generally favorable. Rolling Stone praised the album's feel-good, party atmosphere and described it as an amazing 31-minute artifact. Fans embraced it even more enthusiastically, cementing Van Halen's reputation as a band that delivered both on stage and in the studio. Songs like Dance the Night Away and Beautiful Girls broadened their appeal without alienating the core rock audience. These tracks became radio staples, ensuring that the band reached listeners far beyond their existing fan base. While Van Halen 2 didn't quite match the cultural shockwave of the debut, it accomplished something arguably more difficult, proving that Van Halen was no one-hit wonder. It expanded their sound, sharpened their identity, and set the stage for their meteoric rise in the years to come. If you're itching for more Van Halen, I covered Eddie Van Halen's life and career in depth in a 4-part series, and I also did a deep dive into Van Halen 1. I left the links in the description. Make sure to check them out. And to my subscribers, thank you so much for all your awesome comments. I really do appreciate it. And that truly is what motivates me to keep on doing these. If you haven't had a chance, make sure you smack that like button like it owes you money, and smack that subscribe button absolutely as hard as you possibly can. And if you must smack it multiple times, make sure it is an odd number of times. Thank you so much for watching.